All right, so Tom, whenever you're ready, I'll let you take it away.
All right, I'm going to give it another 60 seconds or so. And just out of curiosity, Tom Leonard has been audio challenged. Tom, would you like to say something to see if you fixed things, or do you think you have? Well, that answers that question. Okay. So, you know, I may ask for a thumbs up or a thumbs down to where I would see you, and just let that suffice. You know. All right, so I am going to share my screen because, and of course, given some extra time on my hands, I'm a believer in less is more, but as I was preparing and had a little extra time, I created 2 new slides. It's like, what am you doing? But, okay, so I'm going to share. And because I had a little time, COVID time on my hands, not that I had COVID, but you know how it is these days. There is a logo for this presentation. It's Question Engineering, and that's my Question Engineering image. In that, how do we build, what's the process for building questions, which is our topic for today. Now, if I could only get the PowerPoint slide to advance. Oh, there we go. So I've never done this for an introduction before, but because everyone is TTI oriented and I have a little bit of probably more background than most with TTI, one of the things they've been doing first with the motivators, or well, they call them motivators. We were in Intermetrics calling them values, I guess. They went horizontal. So my 12 horizontal graph of my driving forces is on the right. And starting March 1st, we're going to have the option of displaying DISC on a horizontal basis as well. And it takes a little bit getting used to, but just a little pitch for it, as I've been using the driving forces for a few years now. When people take an assessment, I try to get them to avoid using the word test. You know, I got to get a high score. And when they see they're low on something, I got to get it up. You know, how do I get my C to be higher? So by turning it on its side, it takes away and shining a light on what is the value of the low and what is the value of the high. It makes for some more insightful conversations, and I can testify for that. But that's not our topic for today, other than to say that if you look at my DISC, my I is 93. It's been higher. And when you're a high I, you have the high I affliction, if you will. I've come to learn that asking and listening is a challenge. And so I realized that years ago, and I've continued to work on that challenge, and I've had some success, and I'll share a little bit with you. So this is coming from someone who has been challenged in asking questions, but Wendy came to me a few months ago and said, Tom, and I don't know how you came to this conclusion, Wednesday, but Tom, you know, you seem to be really good at asking questions. Could you like do a learning lab on asking questions? And I would never say no to that, because if you look at the black thing in my driving forces, that high commanding, high individualistic, I won't say no to, you know, putting a microphone in my hand or giving me a podium. I won't say no to that. So, so I said yes, and here we are. So the topic. And since we have a reasonably small group from what I can see, let me ask the group, you showed up today. Why do you think this topic is important? Why is it important to be asking? Feel free to unmute and chime in.
Okay.
The only way to communicate effectively.
The only way.
Effectively is the key word. You can communicate
right.
anyway, but effectively is asking questions.
Thank you.
It's a way to find out.
What do you think about that, Tom? I'm sorry. I couldn't
Well,
resist.
you're going to learn. Stay tuned, Arnie, and I promise you will learn what I think about that.
Okay.
Hey, Arnie, what's your
Because
I?
I will probably tell you.
Arnie, what's your I?
I'm not sure. It was off the chart. No, the D was off the chart. I apologize. Okay, right.
Yeah, the I's got to be close behind.
Anyone else would like to share?
It's what we do. We have to ask questions in order to get answers. We have to ask questions to get to the next question, to take the Socratic approach of having people self-discover.
Thank you.
And I think there was a handout when I first came into the network, and it says questions are the answer to sales. And so what attracted to me to your topic, Tom, is not simply asking questions, it's figuring out how to create or engineer a question to be able to get a response that we can work with.
Thank you. Anyone else?
We're only
I'm
learning
curious.
when they're talking.
Would you repeat that?
Yeah, we're only learning when they're talking.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm in Chicago, so I've learned to say yes, and it's the improv thing, right? So yes, and maybe they're only learning when we get them thinking. Anyone else?
So yeah, Tom, Mike Myers, I was kind of curious if you were going to go down the path of generating no answers in the questions that you ask. And the reason being that no is a very powerful, empowering word. And so when you empower your prospects and clients, then sometimes they feel better about themselves, sometimes not. So curiosity question for me.
I had not. Thank you for bringing that up, and maybe we'll find some time at the end. If I don't ask too many engaging questions and we lose track of time, maybe we can go there. So we'll put that in the parking lots. Thanks, Mike.
And it kind of, it relates
Nancy,
back to the coaching academy. And then Tom and Steve and Sandy and I meet once a month to practice our coaching. One of the things that we focus on is how the kind of questions we ask, making sure to remember not to ask close-ended questions. So it's constructing the questions again to elicit a response that will help us work with a client.
thank you. Nancy,
You're welcome.
who else? All right, so since I've added some slides, let me try to advance a bit. I don't know how many of you have seen this quote, but I use it with clients all the time because, you know, it might be said that we're in the leadership development business. And so while it's important for us to ask questions, I've come to believe it's really important as we're developing leaders to transfer our questioning skills, or at least help our clients as leaders become that leader of the future. How can we help them to know how to ask? And so with that, I have a poll that Wendy is going to try to press the poll button to get you to consider this a bit further. And so, to what extent are you using the Socratic approach? Are you doing it always, sometimes, or never, I guess, or always, sometimes, or partly? And so we have, oh, well, okay, we did have someone that typically just uses the material and no further. And we have a few people that go there occasionally, and we have a few that always go beyond the content. So thank you for your participation. And I will say, you know, the winner is we do it occasionally, and I guess I'm hoping that, oh, I can share the results, or some of us can share the results, so there we are. I'm hoping as a result of the time we spend here today that you'll be more inclined to go to C, mostly because of what Mr. Drucker says here, that if we can embrace that, we can lead by example, and we can help them to do a better job at engineering questions that help them to lead more effectively. So thank you for your whole participation. You know, and sometimes when I discuss asking question engineering with clients, they look at it, this is cutting edge stuff. Well, we know I'm trying to press my slide advance button, and why won't it go? There we go. So here's a 17th century philosopher that had a thought on the topic. So that's cutting edge, very timely advice, to say nothing of Socrates. And of course, he's in here too. So, why should we be asking? Well, it goes back to the 17th century, plus all the reasons that you shared. But yet, sometimes we don't ask. We know we should, we don't. Our clients, maybe we help them understand that they should. Why don't they? Is it habits, belief, behaviors, or skills? So what thoughts do you have on what prevents us from asking?
Oh, Tom, the one idea. So they've seen your background, for instance, and then they have a meeting with you. So I might go into that meeting thinking, well, I really want to hear what this Tom guy, has to say about all kinds of different stuff. You know what I mean? There's kind of this natural thing of me just wanting to hear your perspectives and get, you know what I mean? It's sort of that kind of there can be that tendency anyway, depending on the topic.
So, but if you're working with a leader and you're trying to help them develop the habit of, how do we get them to embrace Peter Drucker, or just us ourselves? I mean, I admitted up as a 93 I, and that's about as low as my eye has been over 20 years. As a 93 I, it's still a struggle, right? And I want to tell. And so, I mean, again, I now believe that there's a better way, but man, a lifetime of habits can get in the way.
Most of us,
sometimes,
well, go ahead, Virginia.
when you're talking about beliefs and behaviors, I think that too can go back to conditioning. So, like, for example, I saw very distinct differences, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but between leaders who might have just come out of the military and others who had been in industry for, 10 or 20 years, just in the style because of the conditioning of where they came from.
And that's what I was going to say, Virginia, very well, that we learn from those that we're learning from. And if we come out of a directing culture, we choose to direct as opposed to ask questions.
We have role models.
I think another block is that people think they already know the answer.
Good.
So they don't ask because they've already made an assumption of what the answer will be, and they've moved on in their head to whatever the next thing is, the implication of that, the action on that, or some other thing.
Right, and so there's a belief in play, I think is what I'm hearing, that if we already know the answer, there's no reason to ask.
Exactly.
And how valid is that, how valid is that belief?
Well, that's a big question.
And thank you for noticing.
I'm kind of with Tom with the high I, and I come from the consumer goods business. So
I do too, by the way.
And I'm a firm believer that leadership is about getting results. But at the end of the quarter, results are about getting stuff done, not about developing people and stuff like that. So I think that, we get into those habits where, beliefs where results are telling somebody what to do and getting it done and clicking it off the list. And now I'm in a position where it's 180 degrees of that, where results are about continuing to probe so that people will come to their own conclusions. And sometimes I have trouble getting those time constraints out of my mind.
Thank you.
I think some of us have the prior conditioning of when we ask too pointed a question, too probing a question, we're making the other person uncomfortable. And we don't want to do that.
And high eyes like comfortable situations, just speaking from my perspective, right? I will say at one time I was coached briefly by Jerry Hogan, and he said to me, you know, Tom, you need to understand that we are in the business. We're in the uncomfortable business. And if you can't get yourself comfortable with making others uncomfortable, you're going to have a problem. Other thoughts? I'm moving on. I call this the golden response. When someone says to you after you've asked a question, wow, that's a great question. And I've learned to say thank you when I hear that response. And I've learned to go back and ask the question, because think about what's happening when someone says that. What's happened to that person?
They're stalling for time.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
They don't have, you've asked them something they can't quickly answer.
Or they're either a politician or a coach.
Well, that depends.
Ideally, they've started trying to go to a deeper place to figure out what that answer is.
Yeah, just give me some more time, what have you. So on the topic of helping, I had one of the best coaching clients I had. It was a young, hypotensive, 30-something woman, and I taught her the idea of question engineering, and she was all over it. Oh, she was excited. I said, okay, I have an assignment for you. Between now and next week, how many times do you believe you can get someone to say to you the golden response? Wow, that's a great question. And she gave me a number, and she set a goal, and she beat it. It was like 5 or 6 or something. Now, if you do it once a day, that's pretty good for somebody just learning, I think, right? And so I don't always do it, and maybe I should, but when I have the opportunity to challenge a coaching client with, if I see they're engaged and they really want to learn to be more Socratic, I just found that to be a great challenging little exercise. Keep score with yourself.
Tom, I'd like to share something that I got at the previous company to Trusted Advisors at a quarterly, probably in 2001, right about the time you may have come on board. And I remember somebody standing up and saying, never tell somebody something you can ask them. And the more I thought about that, the more brilliant it became, because it has the purpose for me of slowing me down. So I want to tell you something. Well, wait a minute. And I used to tell people, paste this on the inside of your eyelid. Okay. So that whenever you get the urge to tell somebody something, you step back and say, what question can I elicit or can I ask that will elicit the response I was about to tell them? Now, oftentimes, you'll ask that question and you won't get the response of what you're about to tell them, which is wonderful, because then what you were about to tell them would have been wasted or was irrelevant. But yet you'll get so much more information in what to do. So I share that, and it was so powerful for me to have gotten that message. And I actually give that to clients. When
I was your client, you shared it with me, and it's actually on a slide later on here. It's part of the essence of.
Tom, I apologize.
That's all right.
Okay.
But, spaced repetition can be a good thing, I know.
Okay.
But
I'm
yes,
going mute, and I'll go back
to me when you shared it. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to move on. So I got this at one of our network conferences, whatever we call them in the past. And this is another thing I do with my clients. I talk about, business travel back when we were doing it. And, how often have you rented a car for your business travel or even your leisure travel? And all the times you've rented a car, how many times did you ever take that car to the car wash? 0. Conversely, when we have that piece of paper in the right corner of the screen, the title to the car, or even if we're, maybe in the last month of your lease, you're not going to wax it or get it detailed, or maybe you want to hire residual, whatever. But when you have a sense of ownership with your car, you treat it much differently. And why would ideas be different than cars? And in effect, we can go to the Eisenhower quote that it's still in the materials, I think, that the essence of leadership is getting other people to do what you want done because they want to do it. That's transfer of ownership. How do we get them to own the ideas and not rent them? And of course, the answer is in the asking, and we move on. And of course, this wouldn't be complete without a picture and a quote from Socrates. And so I searched for one, and I read this quote, and it's like, that sounds familiar in some way. The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. Where have we heard a similar concept before? And here we go. In the law of process, we have this bridge of discovery. We go from we don't know what we don't know till suddenly you do know. You have the aha moment, that moment of discovery, that moment of awareness in the law of process. So I just want to revisit it. This is my version of the law of process, partly from Ray Overdorf, partly from John Maxwell, but the bridges, and I'm not going to get into walking through. I think most people have seen, if you haven't seen this before, well, it's in the slides and it's in the network. It's deeply rooted in the network. But wow, that's a good question. Or so our job to help leaders and our job ourselves is to guide people to that bridge of discovery and create a moment of awareness to where they go from not knowing, as Aristotle apparently said, to, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. So the bridge of discovery, it's kind of the essence of how do we engineer questions. It's with the understanding that we need to guide them across that bridge. Another way of looking at it is we want to create the eureka moment. I never thought about it, as opposed to, wow, I never thought about it that way, or I never thought about it that way. Wow, that's a great question too. I never thought about it that way before. Now they've crossed that bridge. They have an awareness that they didn't have. I don't know if anyone else has used this phrase, but I invented it, so I like it. Gap awareness. All of a sudden, I could be here, but I'm here. And so with questions, and I'll talk about my favorite thing that I've learned in the network for gap awareness. But all of a sudden, when you see that ideally it's something important to you, that where you see that you have a vision for what's ahead that could be better. The purpose of creating the question is to create some sort of gap awareness to where it's a gap that the person wants to pursue. So what's the process for asking great questions? Since I've thought about this, and I've actually, you might have seen my C is at an all-time low on the disc chart, but it's not low. I'm more pioneering. So some questions to ask yourself as you think about that bridge of discovery. What is it they don't get? What's missing from their understanding of the situation? And to Arnie, to your point, and it's usually not one question, it's a sequence of questions, and some are closed. In fact, you might want to start with some binary. Well, have you ever thought about this? Well, no, I haven't. Well, and so what sequence of questions do you need to ask to where they can get that eureka moment? And maybe there is a punchline. Now, what's the final question that will help them get that discovery, that new awareness that they didn't have before? This one I asked, when I was 20 years ago, I was in Fast Start, and I was annoyed by this question. Here it is. Can I ask you a question? And I thought, what a waste of time. Just ask the damn question. My D was higher then. Not high, but I was less assertive. I was more assertive then, right? And as I've mature and understand things a bit further, the permission to ask, it just sets the stage. It's a transition. It paves the path. And so now here it comes, right? So could I challenge you? Would it be okay if I challenge you on that a bit? Well, okay, I can't say no to that. So it's a valuable closed-ended question that we sometimes forget to ask. We and our leaders forget to ask. And I tell the story, but I thought it was the most stupid question in the world. Why? What a waste of time. And what a waste of time questions are in general. Oh, I was wrong. So I diagram this process in my pioneering, formerly known as low C process. But here's what's happened is I tried to look back and reverse engineer whatever. What happens when someone has a eureka, a awareness discovery moment? So we look at their current thinking. Well, let's explore that a bit. How valid is it? Well, what if might there be a different way? And now that we see the different way, but is there some value in that? To what extent is there some value in that? Okay, so this is my process. I have at the bottom, and I'm going to throw out some other questions about how to get there. This isn't in extreme detail, but it's a process that I hope has some value. As we say, how do we get there? How do we get to the other side of that bridge? And of course, it is in the current leadership materials. The fifth habit: first seek to understand, then to be understood. And frankly, that maybe touches most, if not all, of these 5 little steps in my process. It is with some empathy and a genuine desire to understand where that person's at. And if we don't have that, how are we going to get them across the bridge? I talked about gap awareness, and I learned about 1 to 10 questions early on for the sales process. And I have one great story about how I used 1 to 10 questions to close one call close in a meeting with $1 billion company. But suffice to say that 1 to 10 questions create gap awareness. And it's not about the first answer to the question, how would you rate this? It's why do you say that? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the communication in your organization? We learned that in in our fast start and our how do we sell this intangible thing that we have. And so that opens the door to say, really, well, talk more about that. What makes you say that? And you can take it a step further as we get into, let's clarify the new discovery. Well, if we could raise that to an 8, what would that do for us? More questions. So other ways you can open to help to seek to understand is some general open-ended questions. Well, what's your take on? Where do you stand? How do you see this? And they're great open-ended questions to help people get people to open up and share their take on things to where you can see what is their current thinking. And if we don't understand their current thinking, we can't get them to discover new thinking. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. It's a great, when you've read 3 or 4 other sales books like Spin Selling and whatever, back in the days we were reading Selling to Vito and that kind of thing. Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play is a book. I'm just going to plug the book, and this is one of many nuggets that are in there. There are Covey people that wrote the book, so it's all about first seek to understand. They share this question without really saying that it's about it, that they're using NLP, but it's an NLP. So quickly, NLP, for those that don't know NLP, it's about, we say that we put people in 3 buckets. They're visually oriented, they're auditory oriented, or they're kinesthetic. And so this question covers each of the 3 NLP bases. And so what would you need to see, hear, or experience that would allow you to decide to move ahead or whatever the outcome you're looking for. You put that in the blank. I've just got that filed away as at some point, if I want to tinker with NLP, this question doesn't let you worry about what the person is. It just touches all the bases. So I share that for what it's worth. Now, in our little coaching practicum that Sandy referred to, I had a epiphany one day, because those of us that are coaching academy graduates, we get, it's like shock treatment when you ask a closed-ended question in that forum. And so I didn't like being shocked, nor did anyone else. So I came up with a way, if I could pause for a moment, to hack the potential closed-ended question, which is to say, to what extent have you thought about blank? To what extent have you considered? And so, instead, have you ever thought about just quitting your job? To what extent have you considered? It's a difference. It just opens up the question, and it keeps you from getting zapped. And so it rolls off my tongue all the time now. I'm always to what extenting, maybe overusing it, but I share that for what it's worth, because it is if you want to put more open-ended questions, and you tend to get caught asking closed-ended ones, this little prepositional phrase can help you break the rule, I'll say, or at least open up an otherwise closed-ended question. So as we move down the process, as we're helping to clarify that new discovery in the final step, so as you consider this new discovery, what changes for you? Or we might think about us as what changes for us as an organization. So I changed the pronouns. You can interchange the pronouns. And one of my favorite possibility thinking questions, you've probably all seen it, and I just love to share it, ask it, what would that enable you to do that you can't do now? And then what else? Yeah, I don't know why I love that question so much, but I do. So I threw this in at the last moment just because it's a tool. It's maybe a little bit off topic on the process of asking good questions. But here in Chicago, we have two top 5 or top 10 business schools, depending how. We have Kellogg at Northwestern, and we have Chicago Booth. And I went to a presentation by a Booth professor, and he just out of the blue dropped this in, and I wrote it down, and I share it with, as I'm coaching people to help them get feedback and give feedback and think about the review process and whatever. There's two statements and 2 questions in this. And so I think it's most effective one-on-one, but after someone does a presentation, for example, so what's one thing that you believe you did well? Well, here's one thing I thought you did well. It's an opportunity to give positive feedback. And now let's flip the coin. So what do you think you could do better next time? And here's something I believe you could do better next time. It's a really nice collaborative approach for give and take feedback. And I just threw it in there, whether it has anything to do with the process or not. It's in the slides, and I just wanted to share it. So let me stop. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions? Mike, I don't know what we'll do about your no, but I'll just pause for a moment. Anyone have anything?
Hey, Tom.
Bob.
Do you ever, let's say it's early in the question, do you ever use the old, instead of asking them directly, you use like industry, so it's, because they're probably going to answer it the same way anyway. So what's a challenge? What's a real challenge right now in your industry? Or do you ever do like kind of that indirect stuff or not?
I won't. I have no opinion about that. I don't need to. Mm-hmm. I don't run into the situation. Or I guess maybe if I think deeper, maybe there could be some value about it's a less direct approach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm doing almost all one-on-one coaching, so my sales process is really asking the possibility question and say, So in my sales process, I've got somebody that has raised their hand and said, I want to talk to you about maybe being my coach. All right. So I asked the hypothetical, let's imagine that's a year from now, we work together, you're delighted with what's changed and better about you. Let's talk about what that is. And what else, and what else. And now I've built a laundry list. I've expressed some empathy toward what they're going through. And then I have, this first seek to understand. And so I really understand what's going on, what they want better. And what are the obstacles to that? So that's all I need to do. So I've been able to get pretty lazy in my questioning. I have this process where people that are already semi-qualified, they have an active need as opposed to a latent need. I don't have to uncover. There's still some uncovering because they may not be as candid as because we're just talking on the phone. But that's my long-winded. I don't know.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Anyone else? Onward. So I want to talk about curiosity. I believe that it's an important part if you're going to, to help you become a better questioner. I believe curiosity is important. And so, in our concept speech, we talk about, childhood conditioning. We mentioned it a little bit already today. And as we have children, or as we were children ourselves, but we can, I guess, more recently relate to being parents or even grandparents of toddlers. And they're full of questions. And so this little guy, this is his first Cub game. He's 39 now. It's my son, Kevin. And he used to, what's the name of that? 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 And of course, that's kind of cute, but we get into why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? And at some point, because when children ask us so many questions, at some point we say to our children, would you stop asking so many questions? Stop it, I can't take it anymore. And we probably did that to our parents. I don't recall, but I suspect I did. And I suspect I got a similar response. And so at some point in our childhood, we were told to stop asking so damn many questions. No, and we did it. And it's like, don't talk to strangers and all those things we speak about in the concept speech. It's okay to be curious. In fact, not only is it okay, it's kind of critical to be really curious and want to know more and to find some empathy as we're asking our questions. And so, how can we overcome our childhood conditioning that prevents us from being curious? It's a behavior, and it's a skill and it's a behavior. And so in our materials we have some, we now are saying assertive. That's another slide. So how can you rate yourself? And I challenge coaching clients to share, how do you rate yourself as a listener? And I shared this exercise at maybe it was the last Power Summit, and I guess I'll quickly share it now. There's a facilitation technique that I was taught back at the farm back in the day, and it goes like this. I'd like you to think for me about someone in your life that that is a particularly good listener. And you can do this with a group, and okay, you have someone in mind. Okay, now you go to the board if it's a facilitation. You say, okay, how do you know? When you're with that person, what are the behaviors of that person that let you know that that's a particularly good listener? And we board all the good behaviors. And then you put that sheet aside, and you start another sheet and say, okay, when you're with that person that's a really good listener, how does that person make you feel? And you board all the emotions. Next exercise, you see where this is going. Now I would like you to think about someone that that's an atrocious listener. And maybe you should start with that one, whatever. And how do you know? And how do you feel? Okay, and so have you ever been that person? And why would you ever be that person? And what are the things you need to stop doing to be more like this person when you can look at the outcome of that interaction? So I stopped doing it for a while, and then I somehow rediscovered it. And even though I'm just doing it one-on-one, I do it. And I really think it's great to help people to internalize the emotions involved in the transaction of being a good listener. Now, we can ask wonderful questions, but if we're distracted, and we don't follow up, and we're not a good listener, we waste all the good questions, right? So it's only, the question's only half of it. We now have this word assertive listener, okay, non-judgmental, open-ended. And now I have my video on listening, and we've tested this. I think it's going to work. I don't know if any one of you have seen It's Not About the Nail. I believe it's skill when it comes to fixing problems and solving problems, and we just have to step in and fix it. And why would you not want to fix it? Well, there's a living example for us. Any other thoughts about the nail? All right, I'm going to try to.
It's just.
Okay.
I mean, it's obvious, but sometimes it is just acknowledging the emotion. Or at least that's the starting point before you can help somebody figure out how they want to fix it.
I'm moving toward the finish line here. As I stated before, I believe this is a leadership development opportunity for those of us in the business of leadership development. And with that, we'll ask, well, if we think about asking questions and listening, is this about skill sets or mindsets? And for me, the answer to that question, it's a little like the old beer commercials for less filling and tastes great, or when they had certs, it's a breath mint, it's a candy mint. Well, it's two in one. We're never going to see that commercial again because I guess they don't make certs anymore. But so if it is a mindset, what tool do we have to help address, well, skills? It's about behavior. So what skill do we have that we can use to help our clients and help ourselves to get better at asking and listening? And so I don't know who's familiar with what Dana Carvey did with the Stuart Smalley thing on Saturday Night Live that set affirmations back. But let's take a step forward with affirmations and say, well, maybe this is a good product endorser for the product of affirmations. And I don't know, Arnie, are you still here?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. You were in my group of four. So so I'm going to get to your whenever I want to ask someone something important. But so my concept is the strategic use of affirmations. Let's identify the behavior, or as I like the skill gap, or the behavior, the habit that's holding me back specifically, and listen to the little voices in our head that are holding us back. And what are they saying? And then ask the question, well, what should they be saying? And now, how do I reprogram my belief system so that they are telling me the right things instead of the wrong things? And what affirmations can I create using the first person, positive, within my ability to believe? What can I create to affirm my new behavior? And so I talked about that exercise where, think of someone that's a particularly good listener. And more than once, I've had clients say, well, Tom, you're a really good listener. Really? I'm a 96 or 90 something I. How could that be possible? So I believe it's possible because of affirmations. I'm going to give you 4 that I have had over the years that have helped make it possible. And so take them, adapt them, use them, help clients develop them, because it is a mindset and it is about behaviors. And so, Arnie, there's number one.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that is a great affirmation.
You told me that 19 years ago, and I agree with you.
It's still a great affirmation.
We still agree. I had a discovery about interested being versus interesting, the whole concept. There's a story behind it, but we don't have time today. But as I understood the, again, you have the high disease. I want to show people how smart I am. I got to tell, right? And it's more important that you're interested than it is to be interesting. So this fourth one, I'm becoming the most interested person that anyone would want to know, and I effectively engage people discussing their wants and challenges and feelings, motives, and desires. It's a long one, but you know, it was important for me.
Hey, Tom.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but I have a comment and an exercise on number 4 you're talking about.
Great, please.
Yeah, so I was in this training program before I joined the network, and this guy said, here's what you have to do. The next time you go to a social setting, these are like 5 questions to have, but here's what you have to do. And it's going to take, you got to do this, this is an exercise. So you have to go to this event. And when you engage with somebody, you have to not talk at all. You have to be interested in them. So these are the, you know, hey, Tom, are you from Chicago? How'd you end up in Chicago? You know, how did you get in this business? What do you want?
Where are you from? Actually, in the, there's a Daniel Pink book, To Sell the Invisible.
Where are you from? Yeah.
Where are you from? Very open-ended. It could.
Yeah. But anyway, the idea was that you're not going to say anything. You're just going to listen, and you're going to do that through, you know, as much as you can without it being, you know, awkward and looking goofy. But try really, really hard to do it. It's amazing what happens. But for me, it took like that kind of defined like exercise that, hey, Bob, quiet. They don't want to know about you. Just be that interested in somebody where you're actually trying very hard to not say anything. You know,
hey, Bob, what happens when they say, "Oh, I'm from, you know, Chicago. Where are you from?" I mean, how do you get it back to you asking questions
just
instead of answering?
Quick, and then right back to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned this. Talk more about that.
Yeah.
So the other two, yes, and there is the presence piece. So an exercise I do with my clients, I read it somewhere, you know, go home to your spouse and start with, for 2 minutes, the initial 2 minutes of conversation, your spouse, assume if it's a female in this case, she is like the only person in the world, only person in the room. You are engaged and present like never, like almost, you have just given 100% of your presence. Try to do it for 2 minutes, because I guarantee you much more than 2 minutes when you're first learning how to do this is going to be tough. But start with 2 minutes, take a baby step, and then tell me how that went. So yeah, being interested, being present, it's in our materials, but you know, sometimes we need to, I believe, enhance them and engage them along with ourselves and lead by example, right? So different kind of question engineering, and this a bit comes from Ray Overdorf, but I've got a Wayne Dwyer quote, but I'll paraphrase Ray Overdorf to where when you improve the questions that you ask yourself, you will improve your results. And so what are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves? And to what extent are we challenging our clients to think about the questions that they need to be asking themselves? I guess since we have a couple minutes, are there any self-questions or thoughts on self-questioning that you'd like to share with the group?
I don't have any individual example that I can think of, but I would imagine you could say, all right, so how am I doing? What do I want to do next? Am I satisfied where I am? If I'm not satisfied, what do I want to do next? And how do I want to do it? I mean, you could probably come up with 10 or 15 right at the top of your head.
Yes. And as you say that, I believe that taking yourself through a goal planning process is doing that. What's keeping me, what's it going to take? What's holding me back? Right? All the questions that you need to ask yourself in a goal planning form, I think that could cover it.
There is one question that I continually ask myself, and that question, may I share that question?
Please.
Well, that was called.
I was hoping you would chime in. I'm sorry.
I was asking permission.
Thank you. Now I'm begging you.
Good. And that question is, what's my purpose? And if I can engage with what my purpose is and be clear, then I can go, how am I doing on that? Now that's more general, and it's sometimes not necessarily a goal sheet, but it is self-directing.
So Arnie, that kind of jars my memory a bit when I decided that I was going to do the coaching academy in 2014. So it had been around for a while, but I asked a couple of questions about am I in this business or not? Okay, that's a closed-ended question, and I want to answer that yes. Well, if I'm really in this business, what would that need to look like? And so by asking that question, when the idea of the coaching academy floated out, I was able to grab it and go, okay, this is what it needs to look like. And so it was a self-actualization thing for me. I didn't do it because I had HR people asking me about credentials and questioning whether I had a certification. It never came up.
Right.
But it was, it was more about how can I be the best I can be?
Well, the next question is, why do you want to be the best you can be?
I have to think about, Arnie, that's a great question. I'll have to think about that, and thank you. And I was counting on you. I'm glad I didn't see you in the picture. I was glad you're still here. You dropped off of my screen, so.
Well, what I've learned with only 12 people, if you move the midline over so your slide becomes smaller, I get to see 12 people instead of only 6.
You can, I can't.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you couldn't.
Because I'm sharing a hand. So yes, I know that trick. I know how to slide it over, but I couldn't do it. And
so you're sharing trusted advisor screen.
Yeah. So all right. So we have a little bit of time. So here's an open-ended question, as opposed to the closed-ended one, which would be, is there anything else? Oh, Mike, we put your thing in the parking lot. Would you like to speak about the concept of no, since I had nothing there?
I don't have much knowledge, just a little hint here and there, but you go back to the kid that's very curious. One of the first things a kid does to gain power is to say no.
There you go.
And you probably never heard it. You don't remember your own saying no. I'm sure all of us did. But you've certainly seen kids in public places yelling, no! They're just defying their parents, and they're capturing power. And just like other things that happen to us when we're very young, I kind of think that stays with us. And so there's a theory of thought out there that says you get a whole lot more traction if you let the client say no. And so then you choose what they say no to.
So
The classic is now a bad time to talk? They're either going to say no, go right ahead.
Okay.
They own that no.
You
or
go
they
for
say,
no.
yes, it is. And then you say, oh, when would be a good time, right? But so then they're in control. And but that's about as far as I've gotten with it, right? So that's what I was kind of curious about with your question engineering.
So the only thing I have to say about that is in sales process, you know, we talk about permission to ask. There's a permission to say no, which would go something to the effect of, you know, what I do isn't for everybody. For some people it works, for other people it's not a fit. Would it make sense for us to just explore, and it's okay, we can still be friends or not, but let's figure this out together. Yeah, permission to say, they have permission anyway, but if you grant it, it just brings the force field down. We have just a couple of minutes and maybe not enough time to cover this, but any thoughts on what you're taking away?
I like the self questions, Tom. What should you ask yourself?
Thank you.
I also think that as much as we sometimes think, you know, we may be good at something, or we're aware of different theories about it, or aware of different techniques, it's always worthwhile to go back and revisit those and question, you know, how do we not know what we don't know? Do we, you know, where are we on that? And are we making assumptions, and what's getting in our way? You know, what are the beliefs and habits and so forth underlying it? Because we tend to sometimes just compartmentalize it and move on. And it's good to go back.
Thank you.
I also think there's nuts and bolts to asking question development, and that, like anything else, you can't take it for granted. You have to actively be thinking about how you form your questions and how one question would lead to another and to your end game to get as much information as possible in order to help.
Thank you. 60 seconds.
Continual practice of all the things that you put up will continually make us aware of our questioning skills.
Thank you, Arnie. I think that's a great closing comment. And I only say that because I have an eye on the clock. But well, no, I don't only say it because I think it is a good closing comment. And probably I say that because we have to close, and it is a great closing comment.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was terrific.
Thanks a lot. Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah.
And Wendy's still here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.